Hey guys, so I got a bit sick recently and fell a bit behind on review videos, so I decided to make a compilation video of all the Kevlar paddles I've received so far. Now the new paddles we'll be covering today are the Spartus Apollo, the Sword and Shield J2K and the J2K Pro, the 11Six24 Hurache Control-X, and the Hudef Viva Pro Gen 3. Let's start with the Spartus Apollo, which has been receiving a lot of hype recently. As far as I know, it's the first Kevlar-faced wide-body paddle with a length of 15.9 inches and a width that tapers from 8.1 down to 8 inches. The handle is 5.5 inches and the core is 16 millimeters. This is a Gen 2 thermoform paddle with a full Kevlar face on the surface. What's interesting is that they're promising all paddles will have a swing weight of 108, and when I measured mine in the graffiti, it did indeed come in at a 108 swing weight, and the twist weight I got was 7.6. Both of these numbers are very good, with the twist weight being the highest I've tested so far on a paddle. That low swing weight makes the Apollo very maneuverable in the hands, and its high twist weight gives it a nice sweet spot on the horizontal axis with a very stable feel, making it one of the most forgiving paddles I've hit with. For the power and pop, the paddle is surprisingly on the higher side. It's in the category of stiff Kevlar paddles like the Markinetic and the Thrive Azul, though the Apollo does have a break-in period where afterwards the paddle becomes a little less stiff. I would say it's a step above something like the similar shaped Volare Mach 2 Forza. While the Forza is a great paddle for hands battles with excellent control, the Apollo is even quicker and adds in some more offensive capabilities. It gives the Apollo pop that's more similar to the 14mm Forza variant without the drawbacks that come with thinner paddles like less stability and smaller sweet spots. The Apollo has all those 16mm wide body benefits of great forgiveness and stability, and it allows you to be more aggressive at the kitchen instead of being a paddle meant for resets like the Scorpius. Also, out of all the paddles I've played so far, this is the paddle I've felt the most spin on. I had a lot of confidence being aggressive at the kitchen, hitting flicks and roll volleys to speed up, because I knew they'd be able to dip into the court. The main downside of the Apollo is the shorter length, but once you can get used to its smaller reach, I think this is a paddle that anyone can pick up and use well. Overall, Spartus has hit this one out of the park, and I would place the Apollo in my top 5 favorite paddles of all time. In addition, they've been very good with quality control and customer support for their paddles, so this is definitely one I do recommend to almost everyone to try out, especially since it has a low price of $130, which drops down to $117 after a discount code. Next up, let's take a look at the Honolulu Pickleball Company paddles, the J2K and the J2K Pro. Both are also Gen 2 thermoform paddles, with the J2K using a Kevlar face like the Ruby, and the Pro version using a different Kevlar power weave. Now the previous J2 model used a mold similar to the J60 paddles, but with their newer models, they're using a newer mold. They're both hybrid paddles still, but the length is now 16.2 inches with a width of 7.8. The handle length is 5.5 inches and the core is 16 millimeters. Basically, the length is about 0.1 inches shorter than most hybrid paddles, but also around 0.1 inches wider, and this small change actually leads to some very good numbers for this paddle. My J2K got 117 for the swing weight and 7.05 for the twist weight, while my J2K Pro got 114 and 6.68. For reference, the Ruby I tried had 117 for swing weight and 6.71 for the twist weight. The J2K has been talked about quite a bit already, and several reviewers have compared it to the Ruby, and after hitting both, I do agree with them. The J2K is very similar to the Ruby in terms of power and pop, but it's a more stable and forgiving paddle from its higher twist weight numbers. I personally don't think you notice that small difference in length, but you do notice the better sweet spot and stability on the J2K. The feel and power is pretty comparable, as is the spin, so I do think that the J2K is a more affordable and better performing paddle than the Ruby, as after a discount code, the price goes from $155 to $140. For me, this is another current top 5 paddle, and one that I hold in my bag in rotation. Moving on to the J2K Pro, this is pretty different from the J2K, and you'll notice that this paddle has significantly more pop. It doesn't have the softer feel that some of these Kevlar paddles have, but is more similar to 60's Black Diamond power. Like the J2K though, its higher twist weight numbers do give it a more forgiving sweet spot and higher stability. Similarly, I would say this is a better performing and more affordable black diamond, as after a discount code, the price goes from $165 to $150. It's an excellent option for people looking for a stiffer power paddle in the hybrid shape. Next, let's move on to 11Six24 with their new Hurache Control-X. Now the naming scheme is very confusing, since they have three Huraches: the Hurache Control, the Hurache Control-X, and the Hurache Control-X Plus. The original Control is just a Gen 1 carbon fiber paddle, and the Control-X Plus is the Gen 2 that has a layer of fiberglass in between the carbon fiber layers. The new Control-X is the same mold as the Control-X Plus, so it's a curved elongated paddle with a 6-inch handle. The only difference is that it now uses a Kevlar and carbon fiber blend in the surface, which makes the paddle softer feeling than the fiberglass version. The swing weight of the 16mm variant is 121, while the twist weight is 6.35. The most unique thing about the Kevlar version is how it uses the same mold as the previous model. So you still have that long 6-inch handle, and if you were a fan of the shape of the Control-X Plus, but wanted something softer feeling, then I would recommend the 16mm Kevlar version. Though in terms of its feel, it's not too much different from the other carbon fiber paddles on the market. I would summarize it as being very similar to the Body Helix X3 Lite, since they both have the long handles and plusher feeling faces, but the 11Six24 paddle is an upgrade since it's more forgiving with a better sweet spot. However, my thoughts on the 14mm version are different, since surprisingly, I like this one better than the 16. It's got a swing weight of 114 and a twist weight of 6.20. Compared to other 14mm Gen 2s I've used, this one is the most plush and has the best sweet spot. Like the 16mm version, there's nothing too special about this paddle, but I just think it's a very good 14mm paddle that is actually the best 14mm I've used so far. To me, I just enjoy the feel of it more than other 14mm paddles and found it much more forgiving to use. Both the 16 and 14 are also very affordably priced at $150, which drops down to $140 after a code. Last, let's take a look at the Hudef Viva Pro Gen 3. Like the Viva Pro Gen 2, this is also a rectangular elongated paddle with a 5.5-inch handle, but it now uses a Kevlar and carbon fiber blend in the surface instead of just carbon fiber. The Viva Pro Gen 2 was very similar to the Carbon 1X 16mm for how it played. Both were on the heavier side of swing weight at 126 to 128 and are some of the more powerful Gen 2s on the market. Now the Viva Pro Gen 3s also retain a heavier swing weight, as mine came in at 126 and a twist weight of 6.25, but it's got a noticeably softer and more plush feel off the face. It's one of the softest feeling Kevlars I've used and reminds me of an elongated Pickleball Apes Proline Energy S. For the price, it's the priciest one here at $169, but this drops down to $144 after a discount code. Overall, all of these Kevlar paddles are solid options. The Apollo I would recommend for almost anyone to try out, especially people who want a forgiving paddle with a low swing weight. The J2K is a better 6-0 Ruby at a lower price, while the J2K Pro plays very similar to the 6-0 Black Diamond but also at a lower price. The 14mm Kevlar Hurache paddle is the best feeling 14mm Gen 2 in my opinion, and as for the 16mm variant, this one is just okay, and it might be interesting for someone who wants a softer Control Plus because they like that mold with a longer handle. The Viva Pro Gen 3 is also a bit forgettable and not as player friendly because of its higher swing weight, but it could appeal to people who want a softer feeling Carbon 1X. If you do want to pick any of these up, I've added my discount code here that will work for every brand listed above, and links in the video description below. Also, this is just part 1 of this series, as there are more Kevlar paddles I'll be talking about in a future video, so stay tuned for that.
I was like, hell yeah. Okay, that felt good. Yeah, it's pretty good when she's playing like PBA. I don't know why I did that. Sorry, I was sleeping.